Now maybe you saw the video title and thought, 90s and 2000s CGI, but computer generated imagery has improved over time. Why would you prefer something that's technically worse quality and old? Well, because it still has charm. I love thinking about the 90s when 3D graphics were beginning to be utilised for full cinematic pictures and series and video games. People must have looked at these new worlds opening up in front of them and thought, wow, there's potential here, I can't wait to see what's in store for the future. And I wonder if how it looks now is what they envisioned 30 years ago. After all, CGI has grown exceedingly fast. I've seen a lot of development in my lifetime alone, and when I was a baby in 1996, I couldn't even begin to imagine the fact that CGI would look so different every handful of years of my upcoming life. Also, I was a baby, so I'm not really sure what I was imagining at the time. Not much, probably. Fast forwarding to current day, we have realistic looking locations and people, and we are getting closer and closer to replicating life itself in a digital format, or even something that looks better than life itself. Compared to a lot of laughable models from earlier eras, CGI has grown exponentially, becoming more detailed, widespread and powerful. But only after the passage of time do we begin to compare. All of this had to start somewhere, and what you're looking at here was revolutionary and to be respected, and should still be respected. Of course, some CGI from back then could look overly rough and awkward, but I genuinely think people didn't care as much because it was new and cool. Whilst I still very much appreciate the technology and how beautiful modern graphics can look, I still find myself enjoying the style, the personality, the experimentation, and personally the nostalgia with early CGI, because at the time, you had limitations. And limitation equals imagination, in the sense that you're forced to think outside of the box from scratch. You could try and make 3D scenes look as realistic as possible, but there was this inevitable look and style it was going to have. The textures, light, colour and form resulted in the look that's now grouped into this certain aesthetic that some people still find appealing and captivating, including myself. In the 90s, the materials used often came out shiny or glossy, textures were low resolution and often blurry, the models themselves had to be simpler due to a limit on what the hardware could handle, and let's not forget the unrealistic, very direct lighting and lack of shadows. And despite all of this, the creativity and fun was still there. Of course it was. It was this fresh medium that people could slowly begin experimenting with themselves, a recently developed tool set for creativity. Being able to create from your own mind is a whole realm of enjoyment. Passion brings these things to life. But it was expensive, and not as accessible as it is now. After the first bits and pieces of CGI causing breakthroughs in the 70s and 80s, the 90s took it to a whole new level, and we started seeing an increase in 3D artwork and 3D video games, and honestly it was just the start of it taking over the globe. I get a lot of enjoyment from following accounts online that showcase 90s and early 2000s CGI, old 3D renders, pre-rendered graphics, 90s gaming scenes, you get the idea. But also the internet is a huge place, and the perfect place nowadays to sit for minutes, or may I say hours, at a time browsing and perhaps maybe accidentally going down many interesting and intriguing rabbit holes. What you find can range from the bizarre and uncanny to some stuff that certainly still looks great to this day. During my research, I stumbled upon a few books and magazines. First up, CGI, The Art of 3D Computer-Generated Image, published in 2004, which of course by this time CGI was definitely growing to be increasingly sophisticated and used all over different industries, although this book showcases some other interesting examples such as Delgo, which suffered from delays and wasn't even released until 4 years after this book was published, and unfortunately it didn't perform so well in the end. Also featured are game companies such as Oddworld Inhabitants and well-known animation studios like DreamWorks and Pixar. Next, Digital Beauties. It is a book full of CGI women, some more adult in nature. However, you can clearly see what the CGI was like for the time. The intro also describes that a digital model in an advertisement brings as much emotion to the job as a real one. Differences between the real and virtual break down. The digital crosses the divide between what were once separate fields. Programs noted in the book include Bryce, Maya, 3D Studio Max, Lightwave 3D and Softimage. These programs started off as extremely primitive but laid so many foundations for software to come. Digital Beauties is different to the book Virtual Beauties, and I wanted to try and look up the artists from the book, but I couldn't find too much. I did find some works from the artist Yuki Terai, shown on screen, and also looking into the websites for different softwares such as Bryce or Softimage, there's quite a few galleries of submitted images you can find there too. And I also found out about these 2 animated films made by early Bryce artists. In terms of magazines, there's 3D World magazine that released its final issue only in December 2024, but finding older issues on Internet Archive and flipping through them makes for a Friday evening I like to call fun. They often showcase readers' 3D works, and I love it. It's such an insight to what people were making at the time. It's also cool to see what was upcoming and talked about in these kind of circles. You can also find some obscure stuff like Star Maths, and articles on creations that have since been cancelled or lost, or that never came to fruition. It's also interesting to read some opinions from the time, such as this from the editor explaining how it seems the animation is more important than story, leaving films feeling flat. And in issue 23 there are pages celebrating 20 years of CGI, explaining that after Tron everything changed. Towards the end of production of Tron they were using a machine with just 2 megabytes of memory, and also the first meeting between the graphics and entertainment industries delve as far back as 1958 with the opening credits of Vertigo. There's so much about early CGI you can learn from these magazines, and look, there's even a handy timeline. The website for 3D World magazine also offers an exhibition page, so going through you can access quite a few renders from readers that were submitted and featured in the magazine, and some of my favourites have been on screen. It's really fun to look through. Finally, there's the book 3D and Web Masters, published in 1998, showcasing artists and also a few step-by-step tutorials. I loved it so much that I bought a copy from eBay. It wasn't that hard to find, it wasn't that expensive. I really wanted to be able to scan in some of these, so the scans you're seeing right now are from my own copy, which is very fun. This book pretty much opens with this render of Sonic, which is iconic in so many ways. But looking at the tutorials, you can really see how far 3D has come. There's also quite a few designs used for CDs, which of course 3D art was often used for packaging, album covers, advertisements, and it was just seen everywhere. These colours, so captivating. And when it comes to a handful of these renders, they are flat out weird yet wonderful, and sometimes I think this is what we are missing nowadays, just a bit more of the weird and thoughts of, I don't know what I'm looking at, but I'm intrigued. Of course, there is plenty we can explore when it comes to TV series, film, music videos, video games, but first I'm going to share specifically some 3D media that I remember from my childhood. So there was this channel called Tiny Pop that I would leave on after flicking through countless channels as a kid, and there was some pretty awesome stuff on there, like Roly Poly Oly for example. So cool, right? This ran from 1998 to 2004, the prime years I was obsessed with much children's TV, being aged 2 to 8, and I can't lie, I think that early CG is so perfect for children's television. I mean, Roly Poly Oly is essentially a bunch of geometric shapes and spheres with lots of bright colours. It's the perfect type of media to look at to sense some effortless joy. Staying on Tiny Pop, I remember there being this music segment where videos would be played and a couple of them were CGI. Years ago I spent ages trying to find them again, and when I did I ingrained them into my long-term memory. There's 3 in particular: Northern Heights, Look at Us, Flip and Fill Discoland, and XTM Presents Anya, Fly on the Wings of Love. These 3 in particular I was obsessed with, not just the songs themselves, but I would eagerly sit and watch them because the graphics made me feel something special. Of course, it's most likely that magic you feel when you're a kid and everything is more exciting, but I still love these music videos to this day. Look at Us was really dreamy, and a bunch of people in the comments are just like me, it seems. I think the simplicity, the colours, the style, there's this childlike wonder which made it so enticing, and that's why it stuck in a lot of people's minds. Discoland is futuristic and sleek. See how many robots there are all dancing, look at those moves. This is alongside the shininess that gets linked to early 2000s futurism. These moving scenes on screen looked so different to the real world, and it was being revealed in front of your eyes, and it just drew you in so deeply in the early 2000s. Fly on the Wings of Love was my absolute favourite though. The cartoony style rocks and the song is legendary. So many unique yet fairly basic designs in a lively world. It felt amazing to witness. Something else I weirdly remember from my childhood, which I found surprisingly easily, is these 3D music videos that actually my dad had a bunch of DVDs of when I was younger. I found them quite addictive, and watching back now I realise why. I'm glad to see that most have millions of views, so a lot of people probably agree with me that they were very satisfying and addicting to watch. And of course, there is a long list of music videos from this era. We have Blue, Dabba Dee, very iconic, very dear to my heart. This video is so entertaining, and for as long as I live, I'll make sure everybody sees this blue guy. From the same group, we have Move Your Body, which I was very much also obsessed with. The flying cars, soaring through the air through buildings, the silly animations and movement. There's a story here, there's sound effects. I can't lie, this music video is a cinematic masterpiece. And this scene in particular reminds me of that one Simpsons moment.
This place looks expensive. I feel like I'm wasting a fortune just standing here.
And there's quite a lot of videos that would mix together CGI and live action, like Best Friend by Toybox, Butterfly by Smile DK, and Money for Nothing by Dire Straits. Money for Nothing is worth noting especially because it's from 1985, and the techniques used were groundbreaking. This was very advanced technology for the time, and keep in mind this is a full decade before the PlayStation 1, and still, the style of it all is spectacular. Bullets by Creed is a full 3D music video which I really enjoy. It reminds me of a video game, and to be fair, the music video was made by Visionscape Interactive, and I actually managed to download their demo reel from a 2006 version of their website, and it includes shots from Bullets, but also a lot of Sonic and Neopet stuff. Others are Everything I've Known by Korn, and I bet you this MV blew people's minds at the time. It's very surreal. Go to Sleep, Radiohead, Different World, Iron Maiden, and Sting, I'm So Happy I Can't Stop Crying. Wow. And of course, early 2000s nostalgia would not be complete without Crazy Frog. As a kid, I was watching such a variety of styles, 2D and stop motion and live action, and then 3D started coming in, and any 3D imagery was so set apart from everything else I was seeing, and I missed a whole range you would flip between on TV channels. I also feel like there was such a huge variety of atmospheres, from the really poppy, surreal, bright and happy, to the really grungy and dark, and this definitely goes for video games too. Something to do with the lighting and the way the colours are just really stands out to me for some reason. Continuing on with some TV shows again, a lot of us know about Reboot. Or maybe I really am just stuck in the early 2000s. Reboot is what you would most likely call ahead of its time, and honestly, yes, it's extremely clever and should be remembered for an eternity for many different reasons, and I think when you watch it you can really feel the ambition behind the ideas. Remember, you can show a lot of personality through the simplest of designs. Writing, voice acting, music helps with that too. The people behind the show ran into a whole host of technical difficulties, and 3D would not be where it is today if it wasn't for them, and yeah, I feel like more and more shows and games and films from this era are going to fall into obscurity, and I really don't want that. I hope my channel will help people remember. The production company behind Reboot, Mainframe Entertainment, also produced Beast Wars, Transformers, based on a toy line, Shadow Raiders, based on a toy line, Action Man, based on a toy line, and Max Steel, based on a toy line. But now, here's something that actually predates Reboot. Quarks. Quarks is a very fascinating adventure to sit through, and it should be regarded as part of history. There are 12 3-minute episodes equaling to a total 40 minutes, and watching this from first glance you may think of it as boring, but actually it has unique moody, atmospheric lighting, great voice acting, sound design and storytelling, and the first person view really gives you the sense that you're the one walking around, which reminds me of first person adventure games, which I'll get to later. To me it feels like such a showcase of 3D animation and its abilities for the time. And here's a summary of some more. There's Insectors, made by a small French studio, and I'm not really sure how many people nowadays know of this series. It's one of the earliest CGI series alongside Reboot and VeggieTales, and this is what I mean about certain shows just falling into obscurity. It actually got a handful of awards, and even though it was shorter lived, I think it should still be regarded with as much importance as Reboot. The company also made Geometric Fables, I think in English, with again lots of geometric shapes. And to be honest, maybe this really was the first fully animated series, being from 1989 to 1992. Super Ugly Martians is from a bit later in 2001, and I think with these kind of shows, the CGI added to the humour and personality of the episodes. I mean, really look at these scenes. The lighting, the shapes, the movement, silly to us now, but there's nothing wrong with silly. The series was co-produced as well by Mike Young Productions, who also produced the Bratz TV series and the animated films as well, which are all still my comfort watches to this day. Poppy the Performer is a really fun one with a cult following at this point. 13 million views on YouTube and counting. Very, very strange, but something everyone should know by name. It's just fascinating. This is fascinating. Due to a low budget, there were many shortcuts taken and no voice acting whatsoever. There was also quite a bit of controversy because of its dark themes, despite it being advertised as a kids show. No wonder there's a cult following for it. Excalibur, of course we can focus on the weird and more surreal side of old CG, but there was also a handful of realistic, serious tone series too. I do miss this style of realistic looking people, although this outfit has enough shine to last a lifetime. I can't put my finger on it, but I love the pairing of fantasy and these specific kind of graphics. There's also the 2001 series Heavy Gear and Dan Dare, Pilot of the Future, with theme music composed by Elton John. And in the comments for Dan Dare, someone mentioned the show called Audrey and Friends, which I looked up, and it's this very interesting British 2D mixed with CGI series, and even though people thought the animation was unusual, apparently it gained a cult following in New Zealand. But anyway, personally I kind of like the uniqueness of it. Apart from the pilot, it seems to be lost media at this point though, which is unfortunate. Anyway, moving on. Jimmy Neutron, I mean, do I even need to say? It's so iconic in many ways. One of the production companies, DNA Productions, has a range of magnificent images on an old version of their website. There's Code Lyoko, one of my favourites. I even made a video on it. Sitting Ducks, which I don't have experience with yet, but from what I can see it's a throwback for a lot of people and quite funny. Tiny Planets. This is something I have vague memories of. These characters are just forever ingrained into my memory, even though I don't think I really watched the show properly as a kid. Donkey Kong Country. The animation will just cheer you up. Trust me. And Monster by Mistake, a show I stumbled upon last year, and I can't again fully explain why, but I love the look of this show. I think it's the saturated colours, like look at this bedroom and look at this specific green of the grass. It's kind of magical. Lastly, Cubics is a South Korean series from 2001 that has been on my radar for a very long time. I really want to watch it soon, it looks so enjoyable. Anything with robots, I'm in. So, moving on to film. The 1976 film Future World was the first commercial mainstream movie to use 3D computer-generated imagery. However, and I quote, 3D animation actually began life in the 1972 experimental short film A Computer Animated Hand, co-produced by Edwin Catmull, who would go on to co-found Pixar and change the future of animated entertainment forever. And what do we know about Pixar? Yes, of course, Toy Story, among others. Toy Story is extremely well known for being the first fully CGI feature film. Or was it actually this film? Cassiopeia from 1996. Who knows, but it's worth bringing up in any case. The argument seems to be that Cassiopeia used solely 3D software, whereas Toy Story's creation included digitizing clay models. So, you know, to me either way, they both have their charms, and there was clearly a lot of heart and passion put into both. Cassiopeia is a film from Brazil, and a fact I read is that at some point during production the computers were stolen, so they had to reanimate some scenes. I can't confirm if that's true, but if it is, how devastating, oh no. Ants followed later, and we all know that films with talking animals would become all the rage. And we know Japan for its 2D animation, you know, when it comes to anime and animation studios like Studio Ghibli, but there's a handful of 3D stuff too, of course, such as Visitor, a very strange, obscure Japanese CGI film with kind of awkward CGI, but very interesting still, and Alice, which has this style that I actually find quite cute. And a fun fact, the first CGI scene in a feature-length animated film was from the Japanese 1983 film Golgo 13, The Professional. And I want to share some love for Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, which is not a film that's greatly liked, but my word, the graphics are stunning, and I hope people can look back on this film and at least admire the way it looked for 2001. I actually have the Blu-ray. But yeah, same with Final Fantasy games at the time. Their cutscenes by the early 2000s were already so stunning. Also, there's Advent Children as well, and it's definitely worth mentioning that the CG again was mega impressive. Like, I don't know how to explain to you that these look insane for the early 2000s. Anyway, there's Monsters Inc., Ice Age, the Barbie films, all still very enjoyable to this day, especially Barbie. Barbie is great. There are a few lesser known films as well, such as Kyanna the Prophecy, which suffered a huge box office loss and yet still managed to get a PS2 game. Actually, from what I could see, the PS2 game was released only in Japan in limited quantities, the English version staying unreleased. Also, the film was originally intended as a video game in the first place. To be honest though, I think it looks quite beautiful. Also, The Mind's Eye is a film series that's pretty important to mention here too. The series showcases CGI throughout the 90s. Everything shown in these films was so cutting edge, and I still think it's really cool now and should be appreciated. Looking at animated films releasing each year, you can really see how much CGI started to be put to use in the early 2000s. We started to see the first use of motion capture in animated films. Many CGI films were being nominated for Best Feature. Other countries were utilising CGI as well, and as a final thought, as someone who loves stop motion, practical effects, traditional animation, perhaps CGI has started taking over a little too much in current day. Its development is still very impressive, of course, but what do you think? Moving on from film, video games were in a similar boat. As early as 1973, we saw the game Maze War proving that computers could make interactive 3D worlds, and it became this kind of prototype for FPS shooters to come. Fast forwarding, the 90s saw this huge transition and games were starting to move towards being fully 3D. I have such a fondness for 90s video games, if that wasn't already clear. In the early 90s, history was being made. For example, Alone in the Dark was one of the first survival horror games, and also one of the first games to use 3D characters, overlaying them on top of pre-rendered backgrounds, i.e. static 3D images, something which Resident Evil would also do in 1996. The creator for Alone in the Dark made his own program for editing and animating, since the tools he needed were simply not available at the time. Crazy. The work they put into this game is highly commendable. As I said, I was born in 1996, and along with myself, games like Super Mario 64 and Tomb Raider also began life. Super Mario 64 revolutionised gaming with its wide open spaces. Quake is another example, and it showed that a fluid, full, real-time 3D gaming first-person experience was possible. The mid-90s onwards saw the release of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Mario Kart 64, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Banjo-Kazooie, Virtua Fighter, Resident Evil, Tony Hawk, and so many more. The list is endless. The 1990s was incredible, to be honest. Each genre was being newly added to, and so many different elements of gaming were being massively improved upon. The range of atmospheres they were able to create with the limitations they had was really impressive. And a lot of my early gaming experiences were certainly with these kind of 3D games, and my childhood was full of the PS1 and PS2. I didn't get into Nintendo until later on. And that era is so special to me. Being able to experience a variety of different creative worlds in that way is something I will forever be grateful for. I also want to bring up briefly first-person point-and-click adventure games, you know, the ones where you can click and move around the environments in a very immersive way. This kind of genre in particular often has this eerie yet unique atmosphere which I think is tricky to replicate nowadays. The graphics equaled this uncanny, strange yet memorable feeling, and I still enjoyed these games for that reason. It's really like being teleported to a different yet unique world. These kinds of games would also often use pre-rendered graphics, which is a technique I will always share my love for. I did make a video on pre-rendered graphics specifically, so if you're interested in hearing more of my opinions, there's that. Pre-rendering graphics has not been that popular since the 2000s, since hardware became powerful enough to render in real time, which is the standard now. Before this, pre-rendering was seen as the better option in a lot of cases. Myst and Nancy Drew are two well-known examples. Myst is definitely one of the most influential video games, the best-selling PC game for a long time, and I hate to think that it could be forgotten. The game was actually remade into a version where you could move around in real time, called Real Myst, released in 2000. There were, of course, a lot of so-called Myst clones or Myst-inspired games, some pretty good like RHEM, but unfortunately most others were not as well received. One, for example, is Celtica from 1998, an adventure set on a tiny mysterious island off the West Irish coast. The reason I mention these games is because I want us all to appreciate the different techniques, methods, styles used in order for audiences to engage with interactive worlds. Whether they had to pre-render scenes, cut back on ideas, or deal with slow machinery and software, graphics from this era will never cease to amaze me, and I do still love modern gaming in many different aspects. Think about how many games we can access in current day alongside the amazing indie games that are getting developed too. But the nostalgia I feel for early 3D and pre-rendered graphics will never leave me, and time again I'll feel myself being drawn back into them. The early era of 3D used for art, film, TV, video games was flooded with people achieving the impossible in all different industries, and if you told anyone back then where we are now, I think they may not have believed you. Thank you so much for watching. After my previous video being 2 hours long, I decided I wanted to chill out a bit and make something shorter, and ever since making my pre-rendered / FMV video last year, I've been wanting to talk more on 90s and 2000s CGI for a while. It makes me really happy to do so. I have a lot of passion for what I talk about on my channel, and if you stick around, I am extremely grateful, to be honest, very grateful. I have a Patreon as well if you want to support me, and yeah, I will see you soon with something else, probably. I'm not sure what yet, but I am thinking. Thank you for watching. Bye!